This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stockbox interview. Joining us today is Clarissa Shoamimo-Coker, the COO of Oxford Cannabinoid Technologies. So, hello, Clarissa. Thank you very much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.
No, it's good to be talking to you for the first time, of course, talking to you and the company. So I wonder if you can start us off by just introducing the company, who you are, what you're all about, the high-level overview, really.
Yeah, sure. Very happy to. So we're a pharmaceutical company attempting to develop next-generation cannabinoid medicines targeting what we believe is a huge unmet need in chronic pain. The market is estimated to be worth over $90 billion by the time we launch our first medicine in 5 or 6 years' time. So it's a big, big market. We know there are millions and millions of people living with chronic pain around the world. That's either unresolved or poorly resolved, resistant to current treatments, which leaves lots of those folks dependent on opioids and, of course, the unhappy consequences of those. Just to look at the US alone, you've got about 50 million people looking at those opioid-related deaths, as well as 60,000 in 2020. So 50 million people suffering from chronic pain and obviously opioid-related deaths on a high. There's a really urgent need for new licensed medicines in this space. And actually, the regulatory agencies, particularly the FDA, are really supporting efforts to address those sort of severe pain indications with new methods. They want to see cannabinoid medicines coming through the proper regulatory route that we're following.
Okay, so just tell me a little bit about that business model then, because we were speaking earlier and you say there's almost two different types of models in this sector, the medical cannabis, but the model that you're going down, which is the FDA route to get it into hospitals, to get it into prescription medication, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. And that's why I make the distinction. I made the distinction at the outset. We're a pharmaceutical company going down those tried and tested paths that, other big pharma companies have been treading for a long time to take our compounds, our drugs through those phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials to get to regulatory approval. That means that we are looking at specific indications to get approval to say, yes, this compound will treat this condition. So you can make a specific claim about the medicine, which you can't do if you're in medicinal cannabis. And doctors also will be able to prescribe with confidence, knowing that they've been through these rigorous indication-specific clinical trials. And importantly, particularly for the US market, the insurance companies will be able to reimburse. And also that means you get market exclusivity, for your medicines. There are a couple of routes to market exclusivity, which are clearly both very important. The first being the traditional patent route, and we have that option with one of our programs we'll talk about in a minute. And then the other route, the regulatory route to market exclusivity, where you're looking at what's known as an orphan indication, which is affecting a much smaller patient population, but is significant enough that regulatory authorities want to grant those companies coming up with medicines or solutions for that issue with the regulatory exclusivity that they need in order to make it commercially sensible to pursue that, that indication.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the programs then, because you have a number of them. So can you take us through really what they're all about and what you're targeting, what treatment you're hoping to be able to treat with the programs that you're developing?
Yeah, sure. So we've got 4 programs. The first 2 are quite well advanced in terms of about to approach the clinic. And the second 2 are a bit further back in sort of preclinical development stage. And we'll talk about those in a minute. But to start off with program 1, which we've snappily called OCT 461201, or 201 for short. It's a really interesting compound. It's a highly selective CB2 agonist. It's actually a cannabinoid mimetic, which means it's mimicking the effect of a cannabinoid. It's not a cannabinoid itself, but what it does is binds the cannabinoid receptors, the endocannabinoid system in the human body. This compound binds those receptors with high specificity. We're hoping going to be a first-in-class treatment for a condition called chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy, or CIPN for short. That condition affects approximately 60% of patients who are undergoing chemotherapy at any one time. It's a really debilitating condition and actually often causes folks to stop their chemo treatment, which is obviously not an outcome that any physician wants. In terms of the actual impact that it has on the body, it's all about extremities and sensitivity to heat, touch, cold in those extremities. It can be really progressive and enduring, and so it can last, beyond your chemotherapy and even when you've stopped. So we had some great data on that back in March that we announced, and 201 is very much focused in on aiming to treat that CIPN market. It's also available, we tested in irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS. Again, I think we're all probably more familiar with IBS than perhaps CIPN, but in terms of numbers of cases or market size, in the US, there are about 17 million people suffering from IBS in 2020. In the UK, in the same period, it was about 6 million. So that's program one. And in terms of timeframes and where we are, we will be in the clinic with that program at the very beginning of next year. So January is when we're targeting. So we'll be moving from preclinical into the clinic, which is a really exciting milestone for the company as we move into that clinical phase. And we've been working extensively with a CRO called Evotech, which many of your listeners will be familiar with, I'm sure, international, well-recognized CRO who is doing our preclinical work in order to get us to the clinic as fast as we've got there. So yeah, really pleased with program one. And
that would be phase one, as in the typical phase 1, 2, 3 trials.
Absolutely, yeah. So phase one, just for those of your listeners who might not be familiar, phase one is all about safety and tolerability. So you go into healthy volunteers and just check that your compound is safe and tolerated. So, we're feeling very confident, I'm sure, given the anecdotal evidence, given the other evidence that's out there in the market about cannabinoids and the way they operate. Phase one, obviously we've got to get through it, but we're pretty confident we'll get to the end of that successfully.
Okay. So that's the first program. That's 201. That's for the help in treatment of IBS, but also the chemotherapy things that can come from that. So what about the other ones then you've got?
Yeah, sure. So program two this is our first orphan indication. So I mentioned that, there's the smaller indications where instead of patent protection, which is where we'll be going with for the first compound, 461201, that's all about being protected via patents. This will be protected via regulatory market exclusivity, which gives you in the US about 7 years and in the EU and Japan 10 years. Again, we'll be starting clinical trials by the end of this year, and we're targeting trigeminal neuralgia, or TN. It's a really severe type of facial pain. The trigeminal nerve sort of coming from the back of your head here down through the jaw. It's very fast onset, unexpected, unpredictable, and gives you a sort of electric shock type pain. And it's so severe that it's nicknamed the suicide disease, because sufferers just get to a point where they cannot cope with it any longer. It's very intense, stabbing electric shock like pain, and up to 100 episodes a day sometimes. So it really is very debilitating indeed. As I said, it's an orphan designation. So it's a smaller number of patients, but you get that regulatory exclusivity because of that. You might be thinking, how many cases are there then if it's an orphan designation? But in terms of numbers, in the US, between 10 and 15,000 diagnosed each year. And we estimate that in 2021, there are about 77,000 people living with TN here in the UK.
Okay.
Sorry, just to finalize on program two, we are delivering that by way of an inhaler. I mentioned it's very fast onset, so it's typically very badly treated by anything out there at the moment, because things don't get there fast enough. So we've gone the inhaled route so that we get quick activity and quick relief. It's a pressurized metered dose inhaler, just like an asthma inhaler. That would be the most similar thing to sort of put your mind on. And that's the method of delivery there. Program one, will be a tablet. So again, not necessarily the sort of delivery that you'd associate perhaps with the cannabis sector.
Sure. Okay, no, that makes sense. Okay, so that's two that you've got going into clinical trials in the relatively near future. What about the other two programs you've got then?
So programs 3 and 4, they have been very well advanced with our in-licensing of the canopy growth Corporation library, which we announced in September last year. That was a library of 335 cannabinoid derivatives, and not a library in the sense of walking in and taking a derivative off the shelf. Obviously, it's a library of compounds that we have been screening and working through to identify a new target, for pain. And we're going to identify 2 compounds out of this library, and we're very well advanced in that work. We're looking at a diversified phytocannabinoid derivative, so taking the phytocannabinoid and then improving it with some molecular changes to the structure, which helps obviously generate patent protection, or also, if you're in an orphan designation anyway, you still get that regulatory exclusivity. Again, we're aiming to develop that up to the preclinical stage by Q2 of 2023. So Q2 of next year, we'll be at that preclinical stage with program 3. And then with program 4, we again are looking at a cannabinoid derivative with a new target for pain and potentially some other therapeutic areas, looking at neuropathic pain and more broadly indications including epilepsy and cancer because of the compound, the derivative that it is. And we aim to progress that to lead candidate stage again by Q2 2023.
Okay, so there's plenty of things going on then, isn't there? And it looks like almost things will be fairly rapid as we approach the end of this year and go into the first half of next year. I wonder if you can give me some sort of background on the company, where it's come from. And the company's been around a little while. The market cap's currently about 9 million. I mean, a lot of background work's been going on and the things about to really start to become more tangible. Would you agree on that? Or what can you sort of tell me about the lead up to where you are now in the development of these programs?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment, actually, Mark. So there's been a lot of work going on, more sort of behind the scenes. When you're doing all the preclinical work, everything before you get into the clinic, it's quite difficult to at least pass on the feelings of excitement that we have internally in the business to perhaps the wider audience. But yes, so the business was founded, or the subsidiary was founded in 2017, and we listed, as you know, on the main market of the London Stock Exchange last year in May with the PLC Topco. The group now comprises just the subsidiary that was founded in 2017 and the Topco. And we're working obviously in concert to bring these products, these drugs through the regulatory process. In terms of the mission, I think everybody at the company, I mean, the reason I joined for sure was because I really believe in what we're trying to do. And the fact that we have had quite a lot of hard work to get to where we are, and we're now ramping up into a really exciting, about to be in the clinic phase is great for the company, because we've all been working incredibly hard, as you'd imagine, for the last few years, particularly to get ourselves listed on the London Stock Exchange, and then to have that money in from investors to further the mission, to get further down the road of getting through these compounds and getting through the phases is really exciting. So to be coming up to the clinic in December and then hopefully January of next year with 2 out of our 4, exactly as we said we would in the prospectus, the IPO prospectus, is really fantastic.
From a business point of view, from a revenue generation, and of course the investors and the shareholders, what's the kind of overall vision, and do you have a time in mind?
The interesting thing, as you know, about pharma companies is as you progress through your milestones, as you hit those inflection points, you have different opportunities for sort of value creation and generating different perhaps strategies or pathways. So because we have that big pipeline of drug development, and we've got programs 3 and 4 sort of coming up the track on the heels of 1 and 2, we are looking at all sorts of different ways to bring revenue to the company, either partnering, out licensing. Don't forget, we've got that big library, partially of our own compounds that we synthesized in 2018, 2019, and then also the acquisition of over 300 of the canopy derivatives. So in that pot, in that big library, we're expecting to find even more candidates that we can take forward. So it is a very rich pipeline that we're expecting only to get richer. And ultimately what we're trying to do is bring those compounds, bring those drugs through the phases, through to the inflection points, so that the company can either out-license to a bigger partner, become an attractive acquisition target for shareholders, or ultimately take things all the way to commercialization, particularly with CIPN, which is a smaller indication. It's easier to do. So, you've got to look at particularly the orphan indications as well, because as a smaller company, it is easier to take smaller things forward. But as a board, we're all looking all the time at all the different ways that we could bring value to the company sooner than as if we were just going to take all of our medicines through just direct to commercialization on a solo basis.
Indeed. Okay. Well, hopefully we will start to see some of those inflection points, those key milestones being hit, and no doubt we'll be speaking again as and when those things are happening. You mentioned the board. I wonder, maybe just briefly, if you can give us a rundown of the people who are in the team.
Yeah, why don't I let me talk you through the exec management team, probably the most useful for your listeners at this point in time. So our CEO, Dr. John Lucas, he joined the business in 2018. He's got over 20 years of experience in the pharma sector. He's worked in the US and the UK. He's a PhD in molecular genetics. He's also worked at the National Institute of Health in the US, been a patent examiner for the US Patent and Trademarks Office. And previously to his role at OCT was the CEO at Sizzle Biotech. So that's John, our CEO. And then Dr. Valentino Paravicini, or Vale to his friends, is our Chief Scientific Officer. So it's his role to design, plan, and ultimately deliver the science part of the business, which is clearly very fundamental to what we're trying to achieve here. He's got a huge amount of experience in big pharma, so over 10 years at GSK and Roche. He's also worked in the US at the National Institute of Health and from an academic point of view, and also at the Crick Institute in the UK. And his PhD is medicinal chemistry. And then Karen Lowe, who's our CFO. Karen has been with the business since 2021. She's got over 25 years experience in both the public and the private sectors from a finance side of things. She's a risk management specialist, a fraud specialist, worked at KPMG, DHL International, and Johnson & Johnson. She's lived all over the world and, believe it or not, is fluent in about 6 languages, I believe. So puts me to shame. And then finally, myself, I guess. So my background is private practice, the City of London for almost 10 years. Then I went into industry, worked for Virgin Media, worked for Hutchison 3G, spent some time at Google doing coaching and delivering regulatory work there. And then moved into pharma when I joined OCT in 2018 as GC, moved into the additional role of COO at the beginning of 2021 as I led the company process-wise through the whole listing on the standard list of the LSE. So that was a massive achievement for the company and for me personally. Actually, it was a really interesting process and something I'm very proud of.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Clarissa Shomi-Mokoka, the COO of Oxford Cannabinoid Technologies, for giving us that introduction to the company today. And I look forward to following the developments and catching up with you and other members of the Oxford Cannabinoid team as and when appropriate. But thank you for your time today. Thanks, Mark. Pleasure to speak to you. If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programs at stopboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.